everybody, great to be with you and thank you for joining us today. So I want to kick off this conversation about conscious leadership by talking about just the basic foundations. And it's valuable to understand this just as a baseline for what is conscious leadership all about? What is this? Are we talking about just great leadership? Are we talking about bringing some kind of spiritual voo-voo or woo-woo-ness to the corporate sector? So I just want to give you just a baseline as a way to think about what I mean by the concept of conscious leadership. So firstly, the conscious leader is a person who is present. They are about the people and the processes, but they are very connected to their purpose. So they're purpose-driven in the way that they lead, and they're able to manage themselves very effectively to maintain a solid presence. And that presence can really make a significant difference to organizational outcomes in our experience. So some of the skills that we see in conscious leaders include, what we call systems insight, or sometimes we call this systems intelligence. But this is about understanding how the processes and the systems come together. So what is the parameters that we're working within? What is going on structurally? And in terms of the infrastructure of the organization, what tools and resources do we have? And do we properly understand or have insight into how all of that comes together to enable or be a bit of a barrier? So very important, right? We talk about conscious relating because that is about how we interact with each other, and we'll break these down more further along in today's lesson. But conscious relating is that ability to really be present with people, to share with them who you are and to see who they are, to see and acknowledge who they are as individuals. And that requires a significant level of self-mastery. And so, conscious leadership is largely about self-reflection, developing the skills of emotional intelligence, the ability to develop insight and take action. And we'll talk some more about that too. And then, of course, collective responsibility is the accountability of the leader. So leaders and managers in our organizations, they have responsibility for the collective output and management of the individuals who work in the group. So it's just a bit of a baseline for how we might think about conscious leadership. Okay, so let's take a step back for a moment and have a look at some baseline psychology around how we develop or what the stages of consciousness are. If you think about, most of us are familiar with the concept of Maslow's hierarchy. So, fulfilling our basic needs first for survival and then moving all the way through to that kind of self-actualization at the very peak. So what we're looking at here is the stages of psychological development. And this is an extension of that kind of theory. So we look at, we begin with the desire to satisfy our need for survival. So learning how to stay alive, how to be fit and healthy, how to stay free from harm, and then protecting the people we love inside of that knowledge. And then conforming is about finding a place to belong and feeling safe and nurtured by people around you and providing that nurturing. We move up through differentiating, which is about finding the ways to start that self-actualization process. But then we move into letting go of some of that stuff that helped construct our personality and beginning to expand beyond that and becoming fully who we are by living our sense of purpose and leading a values-driven life. So this is really about, how do you move from that surviving the environment in the context of culture through to reconnecting to what it was that inspired you about the culture, the role, the opportunity at the very beginning, and getting back to that state of serving people. I just included this model because it's a nice, simple way to think about how do these stages of consciousness relate to the concept of above and below the line behavior. And above and below the line behavior, as I said earlier, is also about our thought processes, our interpretations. It's, culture is the sum total of our relationships and our interactions and communications with the people we're in relationship with at work. So I like how there's this draws a bit of a line across the middle, which helps us to visualize that sense of, okay, where do I cease being the victim, where I feel like I have no power. And so, our cognitive processes at work in that environment start to become about projection and procrastination and all of these things that feed that fear-driven mind, within human beings and keep us in a negative or below the line cycle or spiral. And then what we want to do, of course, is use those skills of emotional intelligence. So communicating for outcomes, self-reflection that leads to action. So we want to actually move back above the line into that motivated mindset where we are driven more by trust and love, you know, whatever it is that you might love. It might be self-love, it might be love for your career or your vocation. So we want to get back to that sense of finding meaning in what we do. And then when we step through that a little bit further and look at, well, how do we actually start to create conscious culture? It's just showing us the same sort of flow through those 7 states of consciousness, but as it relates to culture. So you can see on the left-hand side there's absolutely this kind of, you know, sense, and it can often be the case when we're just forming a team as well. Where we are, or when we're going through significant change, or there's been a lot of conflict, or you know, stress has been very high, where we just get into survival modes. And then as we move up through those stages of psychological development, we start to develop relationships, we start to experience self-esteem, we start to transform our own vision of what we're there for. If we look at the 7 different levels in the context of leadership, what we see is down the bottom, when we're in that survival mode, we are really managing the crisis as it occurs. So then we move from that space into managing relationships and trying to create better communications within the team and across the organization, maybe across different silos. Then we start to pull on our organizer skills. So we become good managers, where we're able to manage the productivity, efficiency, quality, the systems, the processes, bureaucracy, complacency, all that kind of stuff. And then we move past that towards self-actualization, and we start to actually become a facilitator of change or an influencer. So we notice the breakdowns and we start to see them in a way that's innovative. We start to naturally develop solutions and leverage the skills of other people around us to create better solutions. And then we move right through that sort of integrating what we need across the organization to harness the resources to actually achieve outcomes based on the gaps we've noticed. And we pull the right people in for strategic partnerships and alliances. And then, you know, eventually we are able to deliver on that original vision of fulfilling the gap. So that's kind of how the 7 levels of consciousness apply at the leadership level. Now, breaking it right back down to the basics, you know, we hear a lot that great leaders are born, like you can't train someone to become a great leader. Or we might hear that great leaders are, they're made. It's a function of technical competence. And the other way, of course, that people come into the leadership pathway is they're like, they have the aspiration to be a leader. Like they want to motivate and inspire people, and that's what they're called to. So it's almost like a vocational calling for them. They really want to lead people, and they are less concerned about the technical environment in which they do that and more interested in the role of leadership itself. So just in terms of some of the impacts and influence of conscious leadership, because, you know, it's not just a nice thing to do. We're not talking here about that. I mentioned the term earlier, that corporate voodoo, like bringing spirituality to the workplace. In my opinion, that wouldn't be a bad thing, but that's not why organizations do it, right? It's not about that. There are some very tangible outcomes that can be measured as a result of conscious leadership. And they're the sorts of things you see in front of you: revenue, results, retention, market, so as an extension of career progression, it might be, you know, how do we actually develop when we're in the organization, even if our career is not progressing? And I know that can be a key challenge for a lot of HR and learning and development professionals. Profit, productivity, reputation, you know, sales, these are all very measurable metrics that we can use to determine the return on investment of culture. And the thing to know about the link between culture and leadership is that statistics tell us, the proof is actually in the pudding, right? Because the research tells us that 70%, up to 70% anyway, of the differential between something and working and not working in a team is actually about the team, is actually about the leader. in terms of that role that leadership plays in building better culture, it sits right in the middle here. So you see the term inspired engagement, and lots of you have probably done our inspired engagement leadership training. But really what we're talking about here is the role of pulling that. If you think about this framework as sort of two sides, on the left-hand side there, we've got the plan for individuals, right? A 10-step plan. But even if everyone in the organization was really, really resilient and emotionally intelligent and insightful and generating great outcomes, connecting well with each other, staying positive, all of that sort of thing, we would still need the organization to provide some stuff over in that sort of space on the right-hand side of the page there. So those 5 bubbles. And, you see the words in the blue arrow going around the side. So we talk about, relationship management. We want to be managing for relationships within our organization. That's what a culture-led organization does. But it's also about action orientation, right? Because we are working in businesses. So we have measures that we must meet to be successful in our job, to keep our jobs, to retain our jobs, but also to expand. So, we do need to be achieving outcomes, and hopefully we do that in a way that generates human performance improvement. So that alignment of systems and processes and people towards outcomes. And we know from research that up to 70% of something working or not working. Now, this can be, achievement of sales results, productivity results, retention rates, change initiatives working well. Doesn't matter what it is in any area, up to 70% of achieving the result that we have the goal around is about the manager. Let's make no mistake that when people are engaged and they are accountable, it shows in the outcomes. Sometimes we wonder, what really is that leadership impact? And I love this quote. Oh, I see I haven't put who said it on there, but conscious leaders can tilt the universe towards the good of humanity. And I love this because we sometimes forget, or we get siloed either within our organizations, in our own discipline or business stream or unit. But, even organization to organization, like our organizations are an important contribution to our communities and therefore our society. And we sometimes forget that, it does all start in our own backyard. So the more effectively we can lead within our organization, the more our team starts to shine. People get the opportunity to self-reflect and grow as individuals. And we grow, of course, in the process. But also our business starts to shine from the inside out. And how magnetizing it can be when you work with a professional or an organization that's really purpose-led, like they're really on fire. They worry less about the professionalism of things and more about connecting with people and having real impact. And so leadership impact cannot be underestimated for its contribution to organizational outcomes. These are the characteristics of conscious leadership. So we'll step through some of these. There are 5 specific areas that we train people to become conscious leaders in, and I'm going to share those with you in a moment. But I just wanted to include this in there because these are the sorts of things that conscious leaders do every day. They communicate for outcomes. So they, when they're listening to someone, they're really trying to hear and understand and learn, because knowledge is power, right? If we want to move forward, we've got to be able to connect with someone where they are and understand what's going on for them. They presence possibility. So wherever something is not working or could be done better, they start to be talking from the perspective of strength and what is required rather than what is wrong. They lead with clarity. They provide that information and they clarify the uncertainties. They support, they embody the concept of leadership by bringing their heart to work, having an awakened mind, but also being a human being in their interactions. So using that concept of inspired engagement to drive real outcomes. Of course, they're grounded by strategic vision and shared goals that we have in our organizations, but they're managing performance with assertive kindness. So it's not like we're talking about overlooking the job of managing for performance and getting better results. We're just talking about doing that in a way that's assertive but kind. That's the sort of characteristic that motivates real accountability and inspires people to take focused action, to seek the clarity they need to take the right kind of action. And of course, conscious leaders demonstrate integrity day in, day out. One of the key things that's required for conscious leadership, in my mind, is for people to make that shift from boss to coach. And we are seeing more and more coaching leadership style now. But all of the research around leadership is starting to, and management theory is starting to show some metrics and some evidence base now for the value of managing people from a strengths basis. So focusing on what works. And if you look at the education system, you know, that's how our children are being educated now, with celebration of success. And just yesterday I went over to my little 5-year-old's assembly, and he was receiving the Child of the Week award for, I think it was like adding up numbers or something, focusing when he's doing the adding up of numbers. So obviously he's very early in his journey, but it's really important to give people specific feedback and to celebrate who they are and what they have been working on to try and improve themselves. And that's just one little example. But the whole concept of the boss to coach shift is moving from, you know, being in this kind of separate autonomous role where you're responsible for telling people when something's not working, which is still a significant pitfall for many, many managers and leaders. We think that, you know, we have developed this level of emotional intelligence because we trust people to, we give them autonomy, we allow them to run their own show, and we only kind of pull them in when something's not working. But the research tells us that people want more than that. So people's purpose is no longer just about paycheck when they come to work. It's shifted, you know, people want purposeful engagement in their roles. And the data behind that suggests that it's in fact women and millennials entering the workforce in greater numbers. So that's what's creating that. Women and millennials are seeking more purposeful engagement and the opportunity to make a difference, and they are more relational by nature than traditional leaders have been. So we're starting to see working environments that are moving towards the practices that are becoming more relational, and that includes that shift from boss to coach. Now, I'm not saying that managers need to be coaches, but what I'm saying is taking a coaching approach to leadership is far more effective for outcomes from what we're seeing from some of the early research. There is a lot of work to be done. Most organisations are busy trying to do more with less. Certainly the organisations that I work with are all very constrained. Budgets are tight, you know, the economy is changing. It's a highly competitive market for most of our clients, and industries are often under scrutiny. So a lot of our work is in mining and aged care, and, you know, safety issues are at the forefront of everyone's mind, and operationalising culture change comes with key risks for itself. So it's really important that we figure out, you know, how can we start to use some of these characteristics and the concept of moving toward more coaching leadership styles to impact things in these particular areas, because we can almost always categorize issues and stressors within an organization when we do culture gap analysis into these 5 areas. So, you know, we know that you've got to figure out what is actually going on. You've got to kind of heat map these areas and determine what's going on with your people, where are the key issues, and then what are the right interventions to create the shift and make a difference in those areas to impact them. So leadership impact needs to be specific as well. The work of leadership, of course, is across the board, but does need to focus on what is the data telling us about where the issues are here. No point going on a huge, you know, internal communications drive if everyone is already exceptionally engaged and feeling great about their role and feeling really valued by the organisation. And sometimes issues can be about uncertainty in the external environment, so changes within your industry. This is our roadmap for developing the skills of conscious leadership. So there are 5 key areas that we suggest that skills need to be developed in to build better culture and to expand yourself as a conscious leader. The first thing, of course, is about engagement. So engagement means really knowing and understanding your people. People connect with people. They don't connect with your technical competence. They don't connect with your level of expertise or, you know, experience in the role. They connect with who you are as a human being. And so if we want better engagement, the first place to start is with sharing with people who you are, what's going on for you in life and at work, personally or professionally, whatever, obviously we need to watch that we're not oversharing. But, you know, in terms of the neuroscience of communication, there are ways that we can communicate which generate and stimulate the production of oxytocin. And when we see oxytocin alive and flowing in organizations, we see cultures that are really warm. They're connected to each other, they support each other, you know, even if they're different, even if their approaches to life or their basic philosophies are quite diverse, they appreciate that diversity, they respect each other's ways of working, and they support each other as human beings. And those are the sorts of characteristics that we see in cultures of excellence. Sometimes we go into an organization and it's like, wow, these guys are great. You know, they've got some significant challenges, but I think, you know, our role here is to help them shape the strategy to get through what's going on in their industry, because as a team, they're already working really well together. So one of the things we can do to generate more of that oxytocin is to start our questions with how and why rather than what. You know, sometimes we'll be asking people, you know, what are you up to with that project on such and such? But if we just flip that and make the first question we ask always a relational question, how are you feeling about your progress on such and such a project? And then, you know, that helps us to connect and create that oxytocin flow and feel supported and valued, because it's an inquiry about how we feel and who we are rather than what we are or are not doing. It's really valuable to understand your strengths. And once you understand your strengths and you start to operate from your strengths rather than your weaknesses or your vulnerabilities, you will find that you have a much better capacity for self-management, self-awareness and self-management. And I'll talk in a minute about why I think that's so important. But when we don't really understand, firstly, our own strengths, then we can get caught in the trap of defense. You're trapped in this kind of cycle of projection, right? So there's this ineffective leadership style above you, and then you're kind of, the pressure is on you, so you're replicating that and projecting it out towards your team. So you've got to interrupt that process along the way, and that's really about understanding, well, what are my strengths? What are the things that I can really leverage about who I am? And it's not a, you know, this is not a wishy-washy concept. There are 34 defined strengths. First thing is to understand your own strengths. Second thing is to understand what are the strengths of the people I'm working with. Now, this is a really cost-effective way of building some baseline culture, because when we understand things, we are able to relate to them differently. So we're able to return to that place of quality communication that's about oxytocin, not the other way around. And the other end of that spectrum, by the way, if we're not communicating to generate oxytocin, is cortisol. So cortisol is, of course, a stress hormone. So when we're communicating in a way that generates cortisol, it actually keeps us separate from other people, and it creates that kind of silo effect between teams, or even between roles, between the discipline of different roles if they have different disciplinary functions. And it can do that with rank as well. So we have this hierarchical structure in most organizations, and you know, sometimes we have to do what our boss tells us, but we don't really resonate with their approach, and a lot of the time that's because we don't actually understand it. And when we don't understand things, it is very hard for us to accept them. So what we develop is this kind of attitude of tolerance, but that's all based on that lower vibe end of the scale, you know, where we've got cortisol flowing and we just do what we have to do because they told us we have to do it this way. And, you know, it becomes then about the numbers and the metrics rather than the people and the experience and the opportunity. Third section is self-awareness, because I'm sure that you can already hear from what I'm talking about that engagement and strengths, like doing this stuff well, requires insight. So self-awareness is the first step of developing emotional intelligence. This is about taking the reflections of what's going on in the environment around us. And this applies, you know, in your homes and communities outside work as well, and in your relationships. Taking those skills of insight and saying, what does this actually mean for me? What is this showing me? What skill do I need to develop here to get a better or different or altered outcome? So we do that, you know, first and foremost for ourselves, And that happens inside of self-mastery. But then secondly, we've got to figure out how we're going to do that for our teams. How do we communicate more effectively based on what we know about ourselves? And again, strengths profiling can be a really useful way, a useful and cost-effective way for teams to do that, because you can map the strengths within the team. So you can have a look at, of the 4 kind of key areas that the 34 strengths fall across, where are the gaps in our team? And then you can recruit into that, or you can leverage strengths to make up for the gaps that are left by some of those areas lacking. So self-awareness, very, very important. And of course, this is the challenge, right? We can all show up at work and manage the resources and get the job done and tick the boxes. But to get true fulfillment, we need to have that self-awareness that leads us to action, so that we're growing and getting fulfilled and meeting purpose, and then starting to create that for other people when we're in leadership roles. And that's what, leadership is all about. Then we take that, we take those skills of increased engagement and accountability and understanding strengths and managing ourselves and our own self-awareness being useful to us, and we put it into practice in leadership. So we might review the strategy or the KPIs, or we might change the metrics for success altogether, or we might start to look at workflow and task allocation in a different and new way, because if what we were doing now was sufficient to get us the result that we wanted, we would have it already. Okay, and then the next thing is, of course, communication, because it's fantastic to develop this insight and to have people more engaged and accountable and to understand strengths, and then to do the leadership work of propelling our results into a different kind of area. But we actually have to communicate along the way. So we want to be communicating for outcomes. We want to be reinforcing. We want to be reviewing, and we want to be using our knowledge about ourselves and other people to better interact, so that the interactions become more meaningful and meet some of those baseline needs we have for human connectivity and social interactivity. Really valuable to be thinking about, how, now that I have got people more engaged and inspired and accountable, and we understand each other's strengths better, and I'm using those skills of self-reflection to manage myself better in the team and to lead more effectively, and we've altered some of the nuts and bolts around how we're leading. Now, what do we need to communicate to who and how and when? And so that's kind of the pathway, I guess, or the roadmap that you would want to follow to develop conscious leadership. Okay, so someone's asking, how important is feedback to teams from their leadership? Exceptionally important, more important than you could ever imagine. And in fact, when we teach organizations how to manage change more effectively at leadership level, we always talk about the golden rules of managing change, which are give people the information, even if the information is there's no new information. People like to feel like they're being communicated with. And that is why, communication is a whole dimension of the conscious leadership roadmap, because in creating your framework and figuring out what you need to do differently in each of those areas, engagement, strength, self-awareness, leadership, and communication, you want to make sure that you are planning for interacting with people. People like information, so very, very important. And when we actually culture map organizations, it's really common for us to find, we do a little diagnostic analysis to see, how does the leadership team think the organization's going, and how does the rest of the organization think that the culture's going. And it always shows up that the leadership team thinks, yeah, we're pretty good, we're doing pretty well, our culture's pretty great, everyone really understands our vision and mission and purpose, and we're a culture-led organization, and people really get that they're valued and they understand their role in the context of the organization. Then we go ask the rest of the workforce, and we get a significantly different answer on the southward trending cycle. So yeah, really, really valuable. We always say conscious leadership, but even aside from whatever role you're in, building better culture is about working it, right? Like growth as a human being, self-mastery, emotional intelligence. These are skills for life. So your environment may not change, but if you develop these skills, I promise you will, number one, have a different experience of coming into that environment. And number two, you will transition more rapidly into an environment that's better aligned with you. So, really valuable to start looking at those things as skills. Understand your own strengths. Get yourself a good coach and work with that coach through challenging circumstances. You know, get connected before your discussions with that person and after, and debrief what happened and get some strategies, build your toolkit as a leader, and you know, get support. Everyone needs good quality support and mentorship and coaching to help them develop. Can we manage up where trust is not our senior manager's strength? Okay, this is really tricky, right? It's a great question, but it is a tricky one. Here's my answer. Yes, you can, but only if you really fundamentally understand and connect to your manager's strengths. So what I would suggest is, you know, you want to understand your own strengths properly, not like what you think your strengths are, but actually your strengths. Not like, oh yeah, I'm a really good people person and I'm really, I have great attention to detail. I'm not talking about those kind of strengths. I'm talking about strengths in the context of core talents that can be used as strengths in your role. So, you know, understanding and moving through a formal process to get connected to what are my strengths, and then operating from that place. Asking your manager to do the same thing if you think they'd be open to it. If not, you would share with them some stuff about your strengths. And ask them what they, you know, how they can help you leverage your strengths more. But you would want to, for yourself, you would want to leverage your own strengths to deal with that person's, I guess, behavior or approach or leadership style. And then you would want to understand more about that person's position and strengths to be able to manage through their strengths. Because what we do a lot, and even these questions, right, in a way, they're about managing the gaps, right? They're about focusing on the thing that doesn't work. So, you know, our senior manager's strength is not trust. It's about, this is what's missing. So what we want to do is shift that to, okay, well, what are they great at? And how do we manage around that to get our own needs met? And that's, you know, a way we can be really effective. Thank you very much for being here today. As always, it's been my privilege and pleasure, and I look forward to speaking with you soon. Have a great day.